So Jim, oh, good.
Okay. Okay. So welcome everyone to Faith and Food with Jim Ennis of Catholic Rural Life. Those of you who aren't Sisters of Charity, like me, like most of you, should know some context for this, that the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth, that I'm the Justice and Peace Coordinator of, and the Sisters of Charity of New York, for whom Sister Carol D'Angelo is the JPIC coordinator. The two congregations had a joint assembly in April, and one of the assembly resolutions was to continue our commitment to Laudato Si with a special emphasis on food print, on food justice. So since our congregation, the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth, have a monthly eco-spirituality group that's been meeting for about 13 years on the first Monday of the month, we decided to use that group in order to explore more deeply the implications of what this assembly resolution was, to explore the spiritual and ethical implications of what we put on our plates 3 times a day. You know, with issues of justice and peace, we're often invited to what's called intersectionality, to see the connections, the interconnections between a variety of issues. And food is really the most intersectional issue of all. We're at the beginning of the season of creation, and food raises a host of ecological issues about the relationship of humans to Earth. The most intense way of interrelating with Earth every day is by what we put on our plates. Food also raises the issues of farm workers and immigrants who work in meatpacking factories. It raises the issue of justice for farmers in other countries, and in ours as well, who are forced to grow huge monocrops of soy and corn, not to feed human beings, but to feed cattle, to feed the food addiction of the meat addiction of the Northern Hemisphere. And of course, the central act of Christian worship evokes the memory of Jesus, who told us to take and eat, to take and drink. So food is wrapped up with our lives in so many dimensions. We're beginning the series tonight, as I said, with Jim Ennis from Catholic Rural Life, who will discuss with us the intersection of the spirituality of food, the status of farmers in America, and advocating for the food bill, a very important piece of legislation. So just to prime the pump for our future sessions, on the first Monday of October, October 2nd, we'll have Kelly Molson, who will discuss food justice, food and the spirituality of food.
Over the past few days, rescuers have raced to find the areas.
You all do yourselves, please.
Signs of life, rubble. But with many still in need of aid, some have criticized Morocco's response.
Will you please mute yourself?
The Prime Minister, as he.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute Mary Donaher. Yeah.
But the government refused to accept foreign aid from all but 4 countries: Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, and Spain. Moroccan officials hope the strategy will avoid a quote.
Mary Donaher.
Crews have finally made it to some remote villages.
Okay. On October 2nd, we'll have, as I said, Kelly Molson, who will discuss food justice, food print, and the spirituality of food. On November 6th, we'll have Sister of the Sacred Heart, Mary McCann, who wrote a book that many of you are probably familiar with, The Meal That Reconnects, Eucharistic Eating, and the Global Food Crisis. And then on December 4th, we'll have Dave Hambleton of Sister Hill Farm, which is a sister charity of New York, community-sponsored agriculture farm in Stamfordville, New York. And I will send out reminders of those and links again. So again, please remember to mute yourself. And if you have a question or comment later in the evening, to unmute yourself. So I'll now turn it over to Sister Carol D'Angelo from the Sisters of Charity of New York, who will lead us in prayer, and then we'll introduce our speaker, Jim Ennis.
Thank you. And so the pictures that you'll see in the next 2 slides are from Sisters Hill Farm. And we're blessed also to have Sister Mary Ann Garista with us today, who is the founder of Sisters Hill Farm. So she and Dave have been very involved over these many years. And Claire and I will be saying this prayer. But as we pray, again, we recognize and remember that the symbol for this season of creation is that peace and justice flow like a mighty river. So we pray today that this river of peace and justice flows through our awareness, attitudes, and actions as we listen and learn today and every day. And may we grow as faithful, informed consumers and as advocates of the important Farm Bill of 2023. Claire?
We hear these words from the prophet Isaiah. Listen carefully. I am about to do a new thing. Now it will spring forth. Will you not be aware of it? I will even put a road in the wilderness, rivers in the desert.
Claire?
May we never take for granted the good, clean air we breathe, the water that sustains us, the earth from which our food is born.
Hear our prayer for farmers, for Catholic rural life, and the peoples and communities it serves.
Hear our prayer for all who lovingly tend to your garden, that we may succeed in bringing justice, healing, and reconciliation of all with one another and with creation.
Oh, all right. All right now.
We
We
stand
together,
together, knowing
we are
we are
one in spirit, faithful that
the
the
seeds
seeds planted
planted
today
will
grow
into
into
strong,
strong, loving
roots
that
that
endure
endure
across the generations in Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Clara. And thank you, everyone. Welcome to everyone on this webinar, this conversation with Jim and with ourselves. And especially Jim, we're very happy to welcome you. James Ennis is the Executive Director of Catholic Rural Life. So last spring, I had the opportunity to listen to a presentation that Jim gave at a monthly Encounter Our Common Home Zoom meeting. So when Terry and I were thinking of presenters for this Faith and Food Justice series, I immediately thought of Jim. Jim's topic was the Farm Bill of 2023. And while Jim brought a knowledge of the Farm Bill to that meeting, I was also impressed with how Jim communicated a knowledge and understanding of how faith, food, farmers, environment are all connected, and how we as people of faith are called to be informed, to be aware, and to advocate for food justice and food security. So some facts about Jim. He has served for 15 years as Executive Director of Catholic Rural Life, which is based in St. Paul, Minnesota. Jim also currently serves as President of the International Catholic Rural Association, based in Rome, and is an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. Prior to his role at Catholic Rural Life, He served as project director at Cooperative Development Services for 8 years and director of development at the National Youth Leadership Council for 4 years. And he also worked in corporate brand marketing for 9 years. I don't really know Jim personally. I've just had one conversation with him, and I was trying to get a feel for him. So when I was doing some research, I came across that article that was written in the Catholic Herald. It was written in its issue, May-June 2023 issue. And so I thought that to get a sense of who Jim is and the vision that he brings to Catholic rural life, I would just share some of the phrases, some of the sentences that he uses in this interview. And it said a lot to me since I'm very much an urban person, not a rural person. So Jim speaks of promoting the vocation of the agricultural leader, and that the church needs to teach people about it and affirm all those who are in agricultural production and research. He says food security is important, but caring for the water, the land, and the entire environment is also important. Yes, there are challenges within agriculture, but also with care of creation, with land, water, and soil issues, as well as climate issues. These are interconnected. Our Catholic faith has a deep tradition of speaking to these issues in a unique way. And then Jim spoke of Catholic rural life's important role to provide a vision for rural ministry and what it looks like. And I think, Jim, from the little bit I know about you and what I was reading, you are a key element in helping keep that vision of Catholic rural life going. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you speak to us today, because I think we all need that vision of faith, food, and especially the importance of agriculture, rural life, and its interconnectedness. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Sister Carol. It's a delight to be here with you all. And I just want to put this presentation on the screen here. And this can be made available. Sister Carol will be able to make it available to anyone. I can give it to you and you can pass it on. We have a lot of territory to cover today, but this is just a privilege. I just want to say thank you all for your ministries. This is a delight for me to be speaking to you all today. But my topic is faith, food, and the environment, and the interconnectedness of our faith and how important food security and food for the world is, and also caring for this gift of earth. Just a little background about Catholic rural life. I hope some of you have heard of us, but oftentimes I speak to crowds where they've never heard of us. We're a well-kept secret, but we were founded in November 11, 1923. We're almost 100 years old. Our organization was founded by Father Edwin V. O'Hara, who grew up in rural Minnesota, a dairy farm. And he went to the University of St. Thomas and was ordained in 1905. And he got permission from Archbishop John Ireland to move out to Portland, Oregon, where he had a brother. And he ended up serving in Oregon, but he served the church across the country. He was an advocate for social justice. He also was very passionate about rural America. And rural America was not extremely Catholic in that time, but there were about 60 million Catholics that 60 million people living in rural America at that time, which was 50% of the population. Today, there's about 60 million people living in rural America, and it's about 18% of the population. So he initiated a lot of traveling rural medical and dental clinics and conducted religious vacation schools and correspondence courses. The joke about Father Edwin V. O'Hara was that, where 2 or 3 are gathered, he would form a committee. He was the extreme organizer. He really knew how to organize. He went on to become Archbishop and then passed away in 1956. But Catholic rural life continues. His vision for the organization continues, and our mission is promoting Catholic life in rural America, Catholic in all its beautiful ways. So we work ecumenically across faith, across denominations in rural communities to solve problems. CRL's vision is flourishing Catholic life, thriving families, farms, and communities centered on faith, community, and care of creation. Now, we do it through 3 program areas: agriculture and food, and the intersection of faith and agriculture and food. And we have food security and economic justice programs, faith, food, and the environment conferences, and vocation and agricultural leader is a program area that Sister Carol mentioned. We have rural ministry and outreach. So we have a course at the seminary we teach, and then we also do retreats for pastors and rural ministry. But we incorporate these areas like Laudato Si and other things to help unpack these newer teachings into the ministries that these pastors have, the important ministry. But we also work with lay men and women in leadership development, and also do some workshops and presentations on care of creation, Laudato Si in the countryside, for instance. But just a little background on why I'm here today. What is going on in rural America? What is the problem? Today, the world produces more food than ever before, and the U.S. is incredibly efficient. So many advances in agricultural technology and models of heightened efficiency have contributed to create bountiful field yields. I was in Stockton, California back in 2011, and we had the Commissioner of Agriculture. We had the Bishop of Stockton, at that time, Bishop Stephen Blair, hosted an event called Faith, Food, and the Environment that we co-hosted. And the Commissioner of Agriculture, she spoke at lunch, and she was just extremely proud of the incredible technologies that have occurred in agriculture over the last 40 years. Now, from a yield standpoint, that may be true. But let me just tell you about some of the challenges that we're facing as a result of this. We have fewer farmers on the land. A lot of farms have had to go out of business because of competitive pressures and the technology that's now being implemented. Farms are larger. The average size of a farm used to be about 187 acres, and now it's almost 400 acres. But there's also a lot of topsoil depletion that's going on throughout the country, Midwest. I know in upstate New York, there's challenges, but there's groundwater contamination. That's a direct result of the intensive agriculture that's happening in, I could quote California, Minnesota, Iowa, and on and on and on, New York as well. The surface water pollution, the decline of family farms. A lot of these farms are now more industrial farms and owned by corporations in some states. Now, in some states, they don't allow corporations to own farms, but that's not the case in every state. And there's also increasing air pollution through these large confinement operations. They call them CAFOs, and the confined animal farming operations, whether they're turkeys, poultry, hogs, etc. Just one couple statistics under pesticides, environmental concerns. The US EPA, $15 billion have been spent on 1 billion pounds of active ingredients, 77% for use in agriculture. And agriculture is responsible for 70% of the surface water pollution in the United States. Now, you have a couple of different levels of pollution. You've got surface water, which are rivers, streams, creeks. But then you also have groundwater, which is the aquifers underneath the ground. And these groundwater, these aquifers are often have really high levels of nitrates. Let me just give you a little visual here. This is nitrogen lost from land to streams, and the red area is southern Minnesota, Iowa, and then it gets into Illinois and Indiana a little bit. But you see a lot of nitrogen lost, and that means erosion. The nitrogen goes into the creeks and rivers, streams, eventually down to the Gulf of Mexico, and there's a area called the hypoxic zone, which is growing, that's when you have an overload of nutrients going into the water and then causing the vegetation to grow, and then that taking the oxygen out of the water, and then it kills all the marine life. So there, and I don't have time to go all into the scientific areas, but this is significant. And so there's a lot of research going on at land grant universities to see how to reduce this runoff, how to reduce the nitrogen that's lost. But also it percolates down into the aquifers, and that's also a problem. We have a nitrate problem in Minnesota, a huge nitrate problem in Iowa and California as well. And a majority of it's due to agriculture. Father Terry mentioned about social justice concerns. Farm workers, we have got approximately 2.9 million farm workers in the US. 85% now are settled, 15% continue to move up and down the states, the coasts, wherever they're working. Their hourly wage now is $13.59. But farm workers work is one of the most dangerous occupations in the US. And very few farm workers have health coverage. And there's still a lot of challenges within farm worker justice and just caring for farm workers. And this summer was so hot, a lot of really extreme hot conditions and in several states that we were tracking. Okay, so what's happening in our common home? We have a loss of biodiversity that's happening, a loss of forest, and this is worldwide. I took a group of farmers to Rome about 5 years ago, and we met with the Secretary of State's office for the Vatican. And we met with an archbishop there, and we were talking. He was actually originally from Oklahoma himself, and he went on to become one of the ambassadors for the Pope in South Africa. But we were talking about some of the real challenges: the loss of forests and woodlands, the great majority of becoming extinct for reasons related to human activity. So human beings must intervene when a geosystem reaches a critical state. He was adamant that we've got to do something here. And then he brought up the issue of water. And fresh drinking water is an issue of primary importance to the Vatican, necessary for healthcare, agriculture, and industry. California has had these extreme droughts over the last 10 years. They've had 2 different significant drought episodes, multi-year drought episodes. And it's causing some real problems and concerns with the government in California about how to manage this. In many places, demand for fresh water exceeds the sustainable supply, and the quality of water available to us is very poor right now, and that's very serious. And it's the quality of, what I mean is quality of water available to the poor is very serious. And Porterville, California, they had to bring in bottled water because of the contamination in the groundwater supply. And that contamination was primarily caused by agriculture. So you might have heard of this program that my predecessor, Brother David Andrews, keyed this term, why eating is a moral act. And actually it comes from Wendell Berry, where Wendell Berry said why he asked the question why agriculture is a moral act. Well, Brother David Andrews coined it, why eating is a moral act. And food is unique, as Sister Carol mentions. It sustains life itself. Providing food for all is a gospel imperative. We all are passionate. You all have callings of, advocating for food justice, food security. Eating is a moral act because it's a human act, and human acts can be morally evaluated. Most Christians in our nation generally don't see agriculture. Out of sight, out of mind, and it's not well understood. This disconnection, though, results in putting a trust in a food system that provides food for us. Now, the issue is who's running the food system, and there's a challenge there. And so there are important ethical questions for us to consider. And here are some of the questions. How can hunger in the human family be overcome? How can we ensure a safe, affordable, and sustainable food supply? How can we ensure that farm workers and owners of farms in the United States and around the world live and work in dignity? And how could land, water, and elements of God's creation be preserved, protected, and used well in the service of the common good? How can rural communities in our country and the world survive and thrive? These questions came from a document the bishops, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote back in 2003 called "For I Was Hungry and You Gave Me Food," reflections on food, farmers, and farm workers. And although that document is 20 years old, it's still very relevant for our time. And I take students, seminarians, through this document because it's so important. This is a quote from G.K. Chesterton, just to lighten up the moment here. Too much capitalism does not mean too many capitalists, but too few capitalists. And so what will happen is we're getting these major conglomerates, owning and controlling the food system. And it's a real concern, both here in the United States, but around the world. But one of the problems I see is a big blind spot. And let me just unpack that for a minute. So the National Catholic Bioethics Center puts out a journal, quarterly journal. And in fall of 2011, there was an article on Christians in the new food movement. And this writer claimed that many Catholics and Christians had been duped into embracing the new food movement and the sustainable agriculture, and the whole organic movement is just a greenwashing in his opinion. This article is really questionable, and we wrote a response to it. Several quarters later, they published that response to that article. But what one of the writer's big mistake was, he said faith has nothing to do with food and the environment. He did not see the connection whatsoever. Now he wasn't Catholic, so he didn't have the rootedness that I'm going to walk through in a few minutes here. But he really did see it as something that's just about the farmer and growing food, and faith has nothing to do with it at all, which is a real misconception. I have a picture of taking some of these seminarians out to a farm, the Rural Ministry Practicum, when you see the seminarians. And when we start talking about care of creation, a lot of these seminarians would shake their heads going, listen, I'm going to be a pastor, a priest. I'm going to be delivering sacraments. What does the environment have to do with that? And that, again, was another blind spot of just not seeing the connection. And then we put on this Faith, Food, and Environment conference in Stockton, California. On the right, you see this little panel. It's had some farmers and the farm worker justice person. But afterwards, this reporter came up to me and he goes, "Why did Catholic Rural Life, why are you involved? Why is the church involved in these questions of agriculture? You know nothing about agriculture." And again, just seeing that they didn't see the connection between the ethical questions that we just posted here and faith, and how faith informs everything around the human person and care of creation, this gift that we have, this earth. So you all have a great, I would say, platform for sharing how those connections are so strong and important. Let me just go through the church's teachings on this. So you all know this, the social doctrine of the church. And we have 17 documents that are specifically focused on the social doctrine. And Pope Francis did an interesting thing. He added Laudato Si to the social body doctrine of the church. And but from Rerum Novarum in 1891 to Deus Caritas S in 2005, and then to Laudato Si. But all these documents speak to how faith informs and speaks into our culture today, or of the day. Now, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops did us a favor. They boiled this down to, have any of you ever made maple syrup? I tapped my maple trees in my backyard one year, several years ago now, and I had 32 gallons of maple sap. How much maple syrup did you think I got out of the 32 gallons? Any guesses? All right, I know there's a lot of people on the call, so I'll just give you the answer. But it was literally like a 3/4 of a gallon. I barely had, I mean, out of 32 gallons, I had about 3/4 of a gallon of maple syrup. And when my kids had pancakes that next week after I boiled it all down, I was serving it in tablespoons to them. It was so valuable. But what the bishops have done for us is these key principles. They boiled down those 17 documents to these themes: protecting human life and dignity. This is why the church is involved in agriculture. The responsibility and participation of every citizen, and how important that is. The option for the poor and the vulnerable. Often these farm workers have no voice. The land has no voice. We have to speak on behalf of that. The dignity of workers and workers' rights. Solidarity and subsidiarity, and how important it is to be working as you all do so strongly together, but also recognizing we have to do our little parts in each of our regions of the country. But also the great respect for creation is so important. Now, the popes have said some really great things, and I just want to highlight some of this because it's really critical to see. When John Paul II visited rural America on October 4th, 1979, he came at the invitation of a farmer. I don't know if any of you were ever able to make it to Des Moines in October 4th of 1979, but the reason he came to Des Moines was because a farmer in Iowa heard that Pope John Paul II was planning his first visit to the United States, and he heard that his itinerary was Boston, Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago. And so this farmer wrote a handwritten letter, gave it to Bishop Dingman of the Diocese of Des Moines, who sent it up to the Vatican, but he thought he'd never hear from the Pope at this letter again. And in about 4 weeks, he got a phone call from Pope John Paul II's office saying that the Pope is adding a visit to Des Moines to speak to rural America on that itinerary. And that just blew the Bishop Dingman away, but he had to then mobilize the whole community. And it was very much an interfaith and ecumenical effort to welcome the Pope to Des Moines to speak to rural America. And we have the sermon. His sermon was very simple, but he said, the land is God's gift, entrusted to people from the very beginning. The key attitudes for farmers, he goes, I'm speaking to all farmers and all those involved in agricultural development. There are 3 key attitudes. One is gratitude. We must always offer thanksgiving and praise to God for all that he has provided us: the land, the water, the climate. Conservation. Farmers must care and conserve the land for future generations so they pass it on in better shape than when they inherited it. And generosity. God destined the earth and all it contains for all men and women and all people so that all created things would share in the fruits. So this is 1979. And we did in 2009, we did a 30th anniversary, and I worked with the Bishop of Des Moines at that time, and we had an anniversary celebration. And I got to interview several people whose lives were transformed by Pope John Paul II's words. And these were farmers who were so touched that the Catholic Church cared about agriculture. But then there's Pope Benedict. And he said this in 2010. He said, I believe that this is the moment for the reevaluation of agriculture, not in a nostalgic sense, but as an indispensable resource for the future. And this was in Caritas and Veritate. He talked about the rights and duties and the development of people and the environment. And he talked about, the need for ethics in order to function correctly, not an ethics whatsoever, but an ethics which is people-centered. He said the environment is God's gift to everyone, and in our use of it, we have a responsibility towards the poor, towards future generations, and toward humanity as a whole. The way humanity treats the environment influences the way it treats itself, and vice versa. The church has a responsibility towards creation, and she must assert this responsibility in the public sphere. And so these are important statements exhorting us, encouraging you all. You all are doing this. You're already obeying these challenges to us. Oops. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do two things at once here. All right. Just a moment here. I just lost my presentation. Okay. Sorry. Just got excited. That's what happens when I get excited. Okay. So now we go to Pope Francis. And what has Pope Francis done? He's raised the bar even higher. So he comes out with an encyclical. And you know what encyclicals are. These letters are meant to be spread throughout the community, be passed around. He's addressing the entire world. Laudato Si, praise be, on care of our common home. Now, what does he say in this document? He says, this letter is to be added to the body of the Church's social teaching. And this letter, it's not only about climate change, but it's also about water, soil, and air pollution, unsustainable consumption patterns, and an ecological conversion grounded in the Church's teachings. This letter is so beautiful. And I hear he's going to do a second letter on this as well soon. But what's really interesting here, this ecological conversion, and I'd have to say for myself, conversion is not a one and done. The Protestants think it's one and done, but for us Catholics, it's ongoing conversion, always ongoing. The closer we get to know the Lord and his creation, the more that we see his beauty. And ecological conversion, a great cultural, spiritual, educational challenge stands before us. This is in paragraph 202. And it will demand that we set out on the long path of renewal. And that's what you all are about, is sharing your vision, sharing this ecological conversion, but to help people see another way of seeing. Only by cultivating sound virtues will people be able to make a selfless ecological commitment. And then Pope Francis quotes Pope Benedict. He says, the external deserts are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. For this reason, the ecological crisis is also a summons to a profound interior conversion. And then I just want to tell a story. I was at the Vatican in 2012, and I was hearing at that time Cardinal Peter Turkson, who led the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace at that time. He was promoting a document they had just published called The Vocation of the Business Leader. And after that gathering, a theologian friend of mine and I went up to His Eminence and we said, this is beautiful. What we need too is a vocation of the agricultural leader. And he had a twinkle in his eye and he says, well, you do it. And so my theologian friend and I, we went and we did some fundraising, got some money for it. And we developed this document talking to farmers all over the world. But this is what the church has to say to farmers and their role in society. The farmers hold a crucial place in society, a unique role in the fulfillment of God's plan. Their work is not merely an effort to meet a basic human necessity, nor is it an economic endeavor reducible to solely questions of profit and cost. At its core, the commitment to agriculture is a vocation given by God, an ancient vocation. And this ancient vocation, obviously, is unique and a privileged way of life. And so we're trying to retrieve this important idea that it's a vocation, it's a calling, and it's an ancient one, but it's a calling from God to care and cultivate the land. Now, all of us have a call too, to be responsible stewards of God's gift. The call to be protectors of the land and creatures of the earth is integral and all-embracing, as we are called to serve as stewards of the world. And the challenge for agricultural leaders is to strike the necessary balance between sufficient yields without undermining the environment. Now, I want to get down to the practical because Sister Carol asked me, get practical. So let's talk a little bit about this. Now, I'm going to be talking for a little bit, but then I'm going to open it up. We'll have a lot of time for questions and conversations. So this is not just a lecture, and then I want to make sure that I share some of the content, but then we can have a discussion. But one is to participate in food production. I mean, I love that Sisters Hill farm. That's a great example of participating in food production. But all of us, I mean, I have a small garden. I have some chickens and compost, and I've taught all my children how to grow food because it's so important to understand the relationship between food and where it comes from, and how to care for livestock, how to care for a garden in ways, and it just opens your eyes up to the beauty of creation, but also the origins of our food. And obviously you all do this, so I'm speaking to the choir here about preparing your own food, but that's often, it's really important to do this and to over the course. All right, I'm getting excited again. Sorry. Let me go back here. Whenever possible, trying to deal directly with local farmers. Farmers markets are a great way to support local agriculture and to have a relationship. I know it's not always possible in cities, but there are farmers markets all over the country in major metro areas. But this is one way to stay connected, is even have a conversation, a chat about how it's going, or being involved in community supported agriculture or congregational supported agriculture. Learn as much as you can about the food economy. And this is important. I read the business sections and follow different journals just to keep my eyes on who owns what and what companies are buying out other meatpacking companies. And all of a sudden they're down to 4 major meatpacking companies. Well, there's a potential there for collusion. And anyway, I don't want to get in the weeds here, but these are important things. Learn about the best farming and gardening practices. And you've heard about no-till agriculture, the nitrogen's in the soil. And if you break up that soil, it can release the nitrogen into the air instead of keeping it in the soil. There were different ways for use cover crops to keep the soil from eroding, but also keeping the
Did Jim freeze?
Yeah, it looks like. Jim, you're frozen? Carol, you have, oh,
Maybe he's going to come in and come out, go
Well,
out and come in again. Yes. And I know we're getting a lot of questions, especially from Sister Rose Therese. So yes, we'll have a lot to talk about.
I'm sorry. That was my Wi-Fi must have gotten weak for some reason.
Well, you're back. We can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry. So those are some 7 things that to do from the standpoint of what we, let me
yeah, your slides are going, Jim.
Yeah, you might have to make him host again. And Jim, are you still with us, right?
Yeah, I'm still with you. Okay, I'm not sharing the screen though, evidently.
No.
Let me
Jim is
I'm sorry.
Terry's gonna try to make you host again. Okay.
Okay, your host again. And we didn't hear number 7, Jim.
Okay, let me share. So number 7 is learning about the life of histories of food species. So heirloom tomatoes, heirloom different. There are seed companies now that have heirloom, and these are ancient seeds, ancient food species, and that you can actually grow. We were growing some heirloom tomatoes in my garden. I just harvested a few over this weekend, and they're different. They look different. They're beautiful. And anyway, these are just different ways to engage in growing food and in understanding the food system at a micro level. But it does and encouraging others to do that as well. Even if they don't have some property, they can even just use small plant pots to grow a particular heirloom variety. This is just some Food Institute research. Food Institute puts out different publications, but this is a research study that came out. Young people have a connection to the people, places, and practices that raise their food, according to Cargill's research in the U.S., China, Mexico, and France. So twice as many young respondents in the U.S. reported knowing a livestock or seafood farmer compared to those over 55. More than 50% of Generation Y participants changed their eating habits for sustainability reasons in the past year versus 19% of older US respondents. And over 80% of survey respondents said the way an animal is raised is important. And almost half of them were willing to pay more as a result. So animal husbandry and care for animals in such a way. So the younger generation, I have 5 kids, and they're all young adults now, ages 22 up to 34. And they go, Dad, you've got the greatest job in the world. You apply your faith with food, and they're really interested in these issues. They're really, what is a problem though, Sister Carol mentioned in my bio, I worked for Cooperative Development Services for about 8 years, and I worked with farmers all over the country, and I'd speak at these conferences or participate in these conferences. These were secular conferences, so they weren't faith-based. But often, folks were passionate about these things, not because of their faith, but because they felt like, Christians are taking Genesis 2 out of context, and they're dominating the earth in a very bad way. And so they were speaking disparagingly about Catholics and Christians, et cetera. And they were, didn't see the beauty of the church's teachings, talking about how we care for this earth. But young people get it. They get it. And when they put their faith into it and connect faith with care for creation and food security, it's a beautiful thing. I just a couple of examples just to give you some things, some food for thought here. This is a congregation support agriculture. So just one example in Bridgeport, Connecticut. An urban Catholic church wanted to build an urban garden to supply fresh vegetables to local food pantries, serving over 200 poor families. The pantry provided primarily canned vegetables, high in starch and not local. So the church members worked together to build raised beds that through 3 seasons, rotating produce to produce tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans in the summer, and greens, spinach, collards, and kale in the fall and early spring, so that they could provide this food pantry with fresh vegetables. That's creative. That is really, really beautiful. And there are churches doing this all over the country. Another parish I happened to get a chance to visit was in Paradise, Louisiana. This is a rural church, Catholic church. And the pastor had a vision. He had a lot of land on his church property. So he said, Jim, and he was from the Philippines. So he was an international priest who was very familiar with farming. So what he did is he wanted to a large garden to supply fresh vegetables to their local food pantry and to provide jobs for ex-offenders. So what he did was he worked with the Catholic Charities in downtown in the archdiocese in Louisiana. He was able to develop a relationship where he could hire between 6 and 12 laborers, farm laborers, to help him plant these vegetables, organize it, plant it, and then they were able to link with the ex-offenders and the local community. And the garden now produces okra, cucumbers, zucchini, tomatoes, squash, but it also produces spiritual fruits. And it's much more than a garden, because they even help with resumes and building the resume, given the jobs that they were doing for 6 months working on this farm. And this picture down here in the bottom, I'm in the middle of it. But it was just an amazing collaboration between Catholic Charities, between this parish. And that was because this pastor had a vision for it. And then he got some community support, and then he worked with Catholic Charities in the local area and was able to do it and pull it off. And it was beautiful. So this is very creative. Now, this is just a local family farm pantry. That this is again Greenhorn Acres, but it's a family. They have a farmers market, and they also have they were working as a CSA, community support agriculture, and so they had a relationship with their consumers, with their customers, and they eating local means more for the local economy. The dollar spent there generates twice as much income for the local economy. When businesses are not owned locally, money leaves the community at every transaction. So it's just thinking about food in different ways. And I could tell you story after story of folks who've really been creative in working with their local communities to create a network. And many of these farmers are Christians who have a real love for family, for farming, for caring for the land, and for supporting their communities. And I end with this kind of very positive notes, but there's 2 notes here I want to leave you with. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Before that, let me talk about the Farm Bill for a minute, because we talked about advocacy. This is a role that all of us can play as citizens. The Farm Bill has 12 titles in it, and it's a $500 billion bill. Over 5 years, $100 billion is spent each year on the Farm Bill. Now, they call it the Farm Bill, but it really is the Food and Farm Bill. And there are 12 titles. You'll see I bolded conservation, nutrition, rural development, and crop insurance. But these are major titles. And let me just give you a picture here of where this money goes. So 500 billion, 100 billion a year. Food nutrition programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, 76% goes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs and other programs to help those who are struggling financially, to provide food for their families. 9% is crop insurance, to provide a safety net for farmers if weather and other types of catastrophes occur. Commodities programs is another 7%, and this is just to enable and support the major commodity programs. Conservation and environmental programs is 7%. So 7% of that 500 billion goes to support environmental programs and conservation programs for farmers. And then there's trade and credit, rural development, extension, and that's another 1%. But even 1% of 500 billion is a lot of money that's important to rural development and to farmer cooperatives. There's all kinds of different programs within USDA to support farmers and farmer entrepreneurship. So, conservation programs, these are, a lot of them. Conservation Stewardship Program and Environmental Quality Program are just 2 that I'm going to highlight. But what we as a church, and I work with the USCCB, with Catholic Relief Services, with Catholic Charities, and other Catholic organizations to advocate for a fair and just farm bill. And the farm bill is coming up for reauthorization. So it's reauthorized every 5 years. And that's why I'm bringing this up into the conversation. Sister Carol was mentioning it because it's going to be reauthorized over the next 3 months. It's being debated in Congress, both in the House and the Senate. And what we're advocating for is a fair and just farm bill, that the commodities programs, not the crop insurance, doesn't just help the large farmers, but also helps small farmers as a safety net. For instance, that's one example. But this conservation stewardship program and the environmental quality incentives program, these programs I'm highlighting here are really important to support conservation. Just an example, conservation stewardship program provides comprehensive conservation assistance for farmers and ranchers who enroll to achieve higher levels of stewardship through continued improvements. Approximately 68 million acres are enrolled as of 2020. Since 2018 Farm Bill, a dramatic increase in farmer applications. As a matter of fact, they have so many applications that they're not able to even process all of them. So what we're asking for is to provide $4 billion per year to the conservation stewardship program for new contracts over the next 5 years, and continue that for through this next Farm Bill. But these are really critical programs to provide additional incentives for farmers to make changes. Farmers, they'll respond to the market, and there are now markets for organic products, and farmers are making changes in production practices to meet the market demand. But there's still a need for government programs to provide incentives for farmers to make these changes. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program offers farmers and ranchers financial cost share and technical assistance to implement conservation practices on working land. And so there's just a lot of over 384,000 farmers and ranchers receive contracts to support conservation efforts on more than 115 million acres. So these are significant programs that farmers are now engaged in, and trying to work to offset some of those problems that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Now, I know it's getting late, and the last thing you're going to do is hear about more details of the Farm Bill. So I'll stop there. But I just want to say that you have a role to play in advocating that the Farm Bill is important. There's no farms, no food. So the Farm Bill is critical, and the Congress linked the food program, the SNAP program, with Farm Bill to make it connected, because they saw the importance of seeing that connection for their constituents, that they were both important, and you can't ignore farms, and you can't ignore the farm part of this, that they are intertwined. But last, I'll just leave you with 2 quotes here for your thinking. Food and agriculture are inextricably linked, and the increasing concentration at every level of agriculture and growing globalization mean that fewer people are making decisions that affect far more people than at any time in history. And this comes from the compendium of the social doctrine of the church. Because of the corrupting influence of injustice, that is, of sin, the church cannot remain indifferent to these social matters. And then finally, the vocation of agriculture leader, a vision for agriculture. The complexity of these challenges will call forth humility and dialogue. Humbly listening to the message of God, our neighbors, and creation itself becomes the ultimate way through which these challenges will be met. Dialogue with God in prayer and contemplation, dialogue with our neighbor in justice and solidarity, dialogue even with creation in humility, wonder, and gratitude. It will demand our earnest prayers for vision, for courage, for hope, for steadfast service to one's family, neighbors, and future generations. Thank you. And I know that's a lot, but we can open up for questions.
Catholic rural life.
Yes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we all can see each other.
Thank you very much, Jim. as you were talking, I was thinking that years ago, I took a group of kids from Brooklyn to visit a farm, and we saw a chicken laying an egg. And one of the kids said to me, "Father, you know, that's an awful lot of trouble to go to when you can just buy them in the store."
Yeah.
So it reinforces what you were saying about that for most Americans, agriculture is invisible. We have no idea where food comes from and the people who are behind where our food comes from. So thank you for everything you do to make agriculture less invisible, to awaken people to the essential role it plays in all of our lives.
You're welcome.
So we have time now for questions or comments. So if you have one, please unmute yourselves and ask, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. But remember to unmute yourself again after you're finished. Marion?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes?
Oh, I was wondering as I was listening, this is so good and so important. Is there, you know, I know in Passaic, the women's group had a little farm nearby the church and other places I've heard. Is there like a cooperative so we know where these places are and how many? Because I would think if people knew each other, it's a spiritual supportiveness in a way. You know what I'm saying? You know, like some kind of directory that there's one downtown Newark and one in Passaic, yada, 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 that kind of thing. Because visiting them make it so real and is so inspiring, and it's a push to start others. I think of all our land, you know.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I've been a part of efforts to create networks and create it's just overwhelming. As a small nonprofit, we try to do our best to make those connections. You know, right now we don't have a directory that I could give you because things change so fast that it's extremely important to keep them updated. But you know, like in Minnesota, where our headquarters is, we have the Minnesota Grown program, and it's based. It's out of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. But I'm friends with all those folks, and so they have a database online. You can go to the Minnesota State Agriculture website, and you can get the electronic version of that directory called Minnesota Grown. But then it breaks it down by regions and by different crops and by different foods and who sells on farm, who allows you to come on farm to pick your own. So Marion, you're absolutely right. It's a humongous effort that I would love to do someday before I leave Catholic Girl Life, before I retire. But I think it's a great vision of trying to make that connection largely. So often it's smaller, more regional based.
Yeah.
I know
I
the
have a
USDA
nephew in Minnesota, Barnesville, and he's a
Oh,
farmer.
sure.
So I'm not sure if he's connected with any of these religious things, but I'm going to ask. Does he know about it? You know?
Yeah, have him contact me. I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, I think he does soybeans.
Sure. Lots of soybeans in Minnesota.
Yeah. You betcha.
Donna?
Yes, first of all, I'd just like to say thanks, Jim. What a powerful, beautiful, soul-moving presentation. But just to make a connection, as you were presenting, and at one point you did mention soil depletion, and I'm thinking soil is life. It is absolute life, that which we can't see, those microorganisms and that. And I was just thinking of the connection between soil and the importance of rich, fertile soil and the Paschal mystery, and that whole image of, you know, we place a seed in, if it's depleted soil, it's a goner, you know, but in rich soil, this seed becomes, through the mystery of life, it becomes these beautiful vegetables and fruits. And some of the images that were on the screen, the oranges and the yellows and the reds, and it's brings in awe and wonder. And I think all of this has something to do with touching people's hearts. That, as Terry mentioned, go to the grocery store and take a package of whatever and they grill it and they don't even know what it is, which animal it came from, but that whole idea of awe and wonder. And I think somehow that's connected to our movement in, the relationship between faith and the environment and people and life. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Sister Donna, yeah, that's a great point. That picture I had of those seminarians standing around the farmers, the farmer and his wife, they were dairy farmers. The first things out of their mouth were, they said, the most important part of this operation here, this farm, is what you're standing on. It's the soil. The soil is life. The soil brings all this farm to life. We couldn't grow grass and hay, and anyway, it's just beautiful. So I agree with you 100%. Thank you for your comment.
And Jim, if you're ever in Scranton, Pennsylvania, stop by the IHM Mother House. Donna has been very influential there in reclaiming a huge hunk of their property with native plants, and it's just gorgeous. So
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ellen Dower. You're muted, Ellen.
That work?
Now we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, both. Okay, you're good.
So thanks, Jim, for your interesting presentation. So when you were talking about the aquifers, it reminded me of an article I think I read maybe yesterday in the New York Times about not just the pollution of the aquifers, but the depletion of the aquifers. So I live in Illinois. I live in Chicago, so there aren't a lot of farms there, but I don't have to go far outside of Chicago to go past lots and lots of farmland, either in Wisconsin or Illinois or some of the other states. And so I see the watering that takes place pretty constantly of the fields. And so I'm wondering what you could say about not just the pollution of the aquifers, but the depletion of the aquifers.
Thank you very much for bringing it up, Sister Ellen. This is a huge issue. Obviously, we had a hot summer. A lot of places did not get enough rain. Those aquifers are not being replenished. There was an article here in Minnesota that just found out that farmers had used millions of gallons more than their allotment, and drew from the aquifers. And so there's an uproar right now of just how to address that problem. But in California, where I'm from originally, I grew up in the Central Valley of California. That's a big issue too. I mean, they had a ton of rain and snow this year. Thank the Lord that they had 10 feet of snow base, and so they had an enormous amount of water. But they're still saying that the aquifers aren't replenished yet. So your point about the concern about drawing down on aquifers, groundwater, that is a real concern around the country. How do we steward that resource, both for drinking water and for agricultural use? I could talk a long time on this particular issue, but I just focused on the pollution. You're right, but the drawing down of the aquifers is a big issue, both in Kansas, in the Midwest, East Coast, and West Coast.
Thank you.
Claire Reagan.
Thank you, Terry. And thank you, Jim. I'm interested in details of the Farm Bill, specifically what aspects does agri-corporation people, what do they most lobby against? or to flip it over, what three particular items in the Farm Bill need our most help?
Well, that's why I highlighted on those 12 titles. And again, I want you to all have access to this presentation so you can look at the titles. There are 12 titles in that bill, but obviously, a lot of the large farmers have strong lobbying entities, and so they lobby for protections like crop insurance, safety nets, commodity programs. But what's often at risk are those around conservation and how to increase those conservation portions of that bill to enable more farmers to participate and to protect more lands. So I would say that right now, I think the most important piece, I mean, obviously, we don't want to reduce the nutrition programs. We need those. That's the food side of it. But on the farmer side of it, I would say that a lot of the farming organizations don't want to risk anything on the commodity programs and or crop insurance. So they'll fight tooth and nail for that. And then at the risk of conservation programs being cut. And what I've heard from senators on the Ag Committee and the House of Representatives on the Ag Committee is that they don't see an increase in the Farm Bill spending. So then there are going to be debates about how that money is earmarked, how that money is spent in the Farm Bill. And back to your point, which programs are they going to fight for and which ones are they going to let go? And I just say the conservation programs that are most at risk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sister Rose Therese, and then Mary.
Thank you very much, Jim, for what you shared. And you gave so many rich links and possibilities. I would really be interested in them. But one thing I'm interested in is the LSAP. How have you integrated that into our church? And the theology, the spirituality, because it seems like a wonderful way that we really can do it, because maybe a lot are not doing it, but the LSAP, the plan, the action is a way, I think, really to get a lot of what you are talking about into reality in our life today. Is there anything that you have on that thing to connect this issue with food, land, water, soil, all of these issues together with the LSAP or the season of creation, all of this kind of thing? It's a big thing.
Yeah, you're welcome. We are a part of the Laudato Si Action Platform, and we participated in programs both nationally and internationally. First of all, our sphere of influence is rural. I mean, we work with urban communities and we try to make bridges between urban and rural. But one of the things I do is we do a presentation on Laudato Si in the countryside. And we do this in church basements and in dioceses. The presentation, though, is all about kind of trying to help diffuse the animosity sometimes of the angst against Pope Francis, the skepticism, unfortunately, that's there. Like, they don't trust the Holy Father. They say, so there's one part of it is just praying the Holy Spirit to continue to soften hearts, so that we can hear what God is saying to us through the Holy Father's letters. This letter is really important to understand he does a beautiful job in Laudato Si to unpack the development of church doctrine on this whole issue. And he starts from Genesis. And those first couple chapters are just addressing that foundational teaching of the church. And then he applies it in many different settings. And now there are, all these different initiatives on different aspects of Laudato Si that was highlighted in the letter. I would just say that, we do our best to speak to dioceses, to bishops and diocesan leaders, and then we also speak to parishes and give. But like in a diocese, like in the Diocese of Salina, Kansas, I gave a presentation. We had over 100 people come into that church basement, and I had the leader of the American Farm Bureau of Kansas come, and he was Catholic. He's not the leader anymore, but he was at that time. And he said, Jim, I came to really debate and to say, why is the Pope right on this? And then he goes, after the presentation, he goes, I just have a whole different attitude. So I think there's still a lot of teaching and just unpacking it in a way that's not, polarizing, but trying to help people see the gift that this letter is. It's a love letter to the world about how we care for this gift of earth, how we care for our common home. So I would say, for one, is there's still a lot of misconceptions about the letter. And I think that is unfortunate. And I think the more that we can share the beauty of it and the Pope's passion for, being concerned about our common home, the more people will put down their fists and maybe open up their hands and listen a little bit more and be receptive to the message of, what can we do in our neck of the woods to be better stewards of this land. And so that'd be one thing.
Mary Ann?
Jim, I'd like to thank you for everything that Catholic Rural Life does. I'm very concerned right now about an important issue, and that's the Farm Bill, and particularly family farms that are so much in need of money because they're disappearing due to these large subsidies that are given to these large corporations. These corporations are co-opting our agricultural system right now. So what can we do specifically right now while this bill is being debated in Congress about making sure that these Catholic values, Christian values, are going to be in this farm bill, and just what can we do?
Yeah. Well, there are several things. One is under the title of rural development is to strongly encourage full funding for the rural development, because in that rural development title are a whole bunch of programs that benefit farmers and farmer entrepreneurship, especially smaller farmers. There's several programs that would support farmers markets and other types of smaller scale agriculture, but it's still important to family agriculture. The other is around crop insurance and allowing crop insurance that smaller operations to qualify for crop insurance, and to lower the limits, to lower the size and scale of an operation, so that smaller farmers can benefit from that safety net, which all farmers need that when catastrophe hits. It's not just the big farmers that hurt; it's the small farmers too. So just to make sure that this 2023 Farm Bill includes protections for smaller farmers who can qualify for the crop insurance. But I can, I'm trying to provide as much information on our website as possible around what folks can do to advocate, identifying who's on the Senate Agricultural Committee, who's on the House Agricultural Committee. That's all public information. You can find out if you have a local representative on that committee. That is really powerful to talk to them specifically, or write a letter to them from yourself and why you care passionately about this. And your passion for family farms is really key and palpable, and that will be important for your local representatives, either in this your local senator or local House of Representatives will hear from you on that. But I would say those two are ones I'd highlight.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
Terry?
Yep.
Yeah, so just a little story. Jim, right after you spoke at the Encounter Our Common Home meeting, I had the opportunity to go to a meeting with our assembly person, U.S. Representative Richie Torres, who is very much for the food and nutrition programs of, in the Farm Bill. But I spoke to him because it was fresh in my mind. I spoke to him about the family farms, some of the other elements that you had mentioned in the Farm Bill. And he said, thank you for bringing that to my attention because I'm not familiar with the farmers' issues. So I say that to us because many of us are advocating for the farm, at least I'll speak for the Sisters of Charity of New York. Over this past year, we've worked with Bread for the World that really emphasizes more the food and nutrition, both for the US and the international. And so we're doing that. But I think this is why I was so happy, Jim, you were able to talk, because certainly our congregation, except for Guatemala, we're very much urban and focused in our New York metro area. So I think as we become more aware and educate ourselves, we have to speak also on behalf of all the information you gave us today in terms of agriculture and farm. So I want to thank you for that. And I'll just again highlight the Catholic Climate Covenant, through its Encounter Our Common Home campaign, really has said that one of the issues they will be advocating on is the Farm Bill of 2023. And so I'm hoping, Jim, through maybe your website, we've been directed at times, I think, to the USCCB website too. I don't know if there was something that we were able to advocate for a couple of months ago through them, but I know that I'm wondering, and I'm hoping through Catholic Climate Covenant, Encounter Our Common Home campaign, we'll get some more like advocacy email alerts and things, because our sisters do tend to read that, and many of them will click to send it to their legislators. But hopefully your webinar, your conversation today will give us impetus and a greater understanding and appreciation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we have a webinar on the 21st at it's 1 p.m. Central Time. That I can send you a link, Sister Carol. But I'll have the USCCB, different USCCB representatives and a farmer on it, and we'll begin talking about the Farm Bill, and from a Catholic perspective, areas of advocacy. That'll be again a week from Thursday at 1 p.m. Central. If you're all invited, it's free.
Well, that's good. And Jim, if we register, do you send out recordings? Because many of us, if we have other meetings, is it recorded and then you send out a link to the recording?
Yeah, this is our first one, so I'll say yes.
Oh, okay. Very good. As everyone knows, we're lucky that Terry, with his YouTube channel, that this will be recorded, and many times we have many more people listening to the YouTube than we have.
YouTube, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Catholic Climate Covenant has done that, and often has made them available. Although I haven't seen that one that we did back in I don't know, April. It hasn't been published yet for some reason, and I think they lost an intern, or l'intern left, and so. But that was a great conversation. And there's another source. It's not faith-based, but it's called the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, and we're on this coalition, National Sustainable Ag Coalition, and they are advocating on behalf of family farms and sustainable agriculture. From a technical standpoint, it's really excellent. Some of you, it gets into the weeds of, but some of your questions have asked for more detail. They do a nice job too of tracking the Farm Bill. I do as best we can, with what we have in terms of our resources. So we put stuff on, we'll put updates on our website, but that's another good resource just to get, I would say, week to week updates of what's happening.
Mhm.
And then we have a faith lens that we can add to that, and it's enriched. But they're really helpful on the technical side if you're interested.
Okay, we're about at the end of our time. As Carol mentioned, this is being recorded, and I'll send the recording around the same way you learned about that we were having it. You'll get the recording that way. And I'll also, if Jim or Carol can send me links to some of these websites you've mentioned, that can be everybody's homework. Go to one of these advocacy websites of the Farm Bill. Do some research and take some action on it, and encourage your members of your community, your family, your friends. Bring agriculture out of the invisibility, as Jim said. So Jim, thank you so much for this very rich and stimulating conversation that hopefully will result in a lot of action from this group.
Well, thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Terry. God bless you all in your work and ministry.
And you were right that you are preaching to the choir, because there's nobody who has done more for advocacy for ecological issues in the American church than women religious and people associated. So
Amen.
Amen.
and
Okay.
thanks to all of you. If you it's too bad you didn't have time to hear the stories of some of the people who are on here, because they've done incredible things. Thank you for that, and may we continue to do incredible things. So I'll send the link around to the video and some resources. And please join us again on the first Monday of October, October 2nd, for Kelly Moltzen, who will discuss, as I said, food justice, food print, and the spirituality of food. So we hope to see you. And we had about 40 people tonight. We hope to have 80 at the next one.
All right.
So thanks to everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.